From VOA Learning English, this is the Health Report. Most countries are now free of polio, but the disease remains a threat in some countries, including Nigeria. Gregory Hussey is the director of the Vaccines for Africa initiative at the University of Cape Town in South Africa. He says there is a worldwide movement to eradicate polio in the next 5 to 10 years. He says there are problems in Nigeria because people are refusing to immunize their children for a number of reasons. The World Health Organization says after polio vaccination campaigns were interfered with in northern Nigeria several years ago, the virus there spread all the way to Ethiopia. Gregory Hussey says continued outbreaks of measles represent another failure. The United Nations and other international agencies have immunization campaigns, but Africa lacks its own major programs. The Vaccines for Africa initiative was started to spread knowledge about vaccines not only to healthcare workers, but to policymakers and communities. But Gregory Hussey says cost remains a major problem. An international public-private partnership, the Gavi Alliance, helps developing countries offer vaccines. Gavi negotiates with drug companies to lower the cost of medicines. But Gregory Hussey warns that low-cost vaccines will not be available forever. He says some countries that have enough money to vaccinate children have not made that a top goal. Researchers at the University of Cape Town say African leaders must be held accountable for meeting immunization targets and honoring international commitments. For VOA Learning English, I'm Laurel Bowman.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Health Report in Special English. Microscopes are not always available where they are needed. Now, for a few dollars and a little work, the iPhone can become a microscope. The same is probably true of other smartphones as well. Dr. Isaac Bogosh is an infectious disease specialist at Toronto General Hospital in Canada. Dr. Bogosh was the lead investigator on a new study of the iPhone microscope. It appears in the American Journal of Tropical Medicine and Hygiene. He and his colleagues had heard of laboratory images made with smartphones. For the new study, he says he used an iPhone 4S because he happened to own one. But he says any smartphone with a good camera and a zoom function should work just as well. Dr. Bogosh says he and his colleagues bought a ball lens online for about $8. They attached the special lens to the lens of the iPhone camera using double-sided tape. Dr. Bogosh and his colleagues from Massachusetts General Hospital and the Swiss Tropical and Public Health Institute tested the iPhone on Pemba Island in Tanzania. They looked for intestinal parasites in school-aged children. He says by putting the lens close to the slides, his team was able to see the parasites they were looking for pretty easily. The results were better when the infections were more severe, but he thinks that will change when the technology improves. He says the smartphone microscope could greatly extend disease control in poor, rural areas. Medical workers would also be able to email an image to an expert for help in identification. For VOA Learning English, I'm Carolyn Presutti.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Health Report. Each year, an estimated 106 million people get infected with gonorrhea. This sexually transmitted disease is getting harder and harder to treat. The World Health Organization says gonorrhea is increasingly resistant to antibiotics. The WHO warns that there are few treatment options available. The world, it says, is running out of ways to cure the disease. Manjula Lusty Narasimhan is a scientist in the Department of Sexually Transmitted Diseases at the WHO. She says infected men and women of reproductive age could become infertile if gonorrhea becomes untreatable. This bacterial disease can also threaten the health of infected pregnant women and their unborn children. Gonorrhea is one of 4 major sexually transmitted diseases that can be cured. The other 3 are chlamydial infection, syphilis, and chancroid. But the organism that causes gonorrhea has developed resistance to almost every class of antibiotic. Resistance is caused by the overuse and misuse of antibiotics and by the use of poor quality antibiotics. It also results from natural genetic changes or mutations within the organisms that cause diseases. The WHO says it does not have enough information to know the extent of gonorrhea resistance worldwide. But it says cases of resistance to treatment have been reported in Australia, France, Japan, Norway, Sweden, and Britain. The WHO is calling for smarter use of antibiotics and more research into new ways to treat the infections. Dr. Lusty Narasimhan says there is currently no research into new drug treatments for gonorrhea. For VOA Learning English, I'm Laurel Bowman.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Health Report. Do people get happier with age? If you said yes, then you were right. A recent study found that people generally become happier and worry less after the age of 50. A team at Stony Brook University in New York asked people between the ages of 18 and 85 about their happiness. The researchers found that levels of stress were highest in adults between the ages of 22 and 25. Stress levels dropped sharply after people reached their 50s. Happiness was highest among the youngest adults and those in their early 70s. But those least likely to report feeling negative emotions were the oldest ones. The study also found that men and women have similar emotional patterns as they grow older. But women of all ages reported more sadness, stress, and worry than men. The researchers also considered possible influences, like having young children, being unemployed, or being single. But they found that these situations did not affect the levels of happiness and well-being related to age. So why would happiness increase with age? One theory is that as people get older, they become more thankful for what they have and have better control of their emotions. They also spend less time thinking about bad experiences. Happiness is not the only thing that seems to improve with age. Another study found that people in their 80s reported the fewest problems with their sleep. Researchers had expected to confirm the popular belief that sleep problems are connected to aging. The survey found an increase in sleep problems during middle age, especially in women. But overall, people reported that they felt their sleep quality improved with age. For VOA Learning English, I'm Alex Villarreal.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Health Report in Special English. Sometimes simple actions taken at the right time can do a lot of good. A new report says more than 800,000 babies could be saved each year if all mothers begin breastfeeding within the first hour after giving birth. Save the Children released the report. It calls breastfeeding one of the best ways to prevent malnutrition. Hunger is a major killer of children under the age of 5. Carolyn Miles is head of Save the Children. She explains that getting mothers to start breastfeeding can sometimes be the hardest part. The first milk from mothers is called colostrum. This is a highly nutritious form of breast milk. Colostrum helps build the baby's immune system and works best in the first hours after a mother gives birth. Colostrum is yellowish, sticky breast milk. The World Health Organization calls it the perfect food for the newborn. Save the Children describes it as a child's first immunization. But Carolyn Miles says in some cultures there is a mistaken belief that colostrum is dangerous. She says mothers in a lot of places around the world throw away the colostrum. The World Health Organization says mothers should feed their babies only breast milk for the first 6 months. Carolyn Miles says babies do not need anything else. After 6 months, the WHO says breastfeeding should continue along with other foods up to 2 years of age or beyond. The Save the Children report, called Superfood for Babies, examined barriers to breastfeeding. These include cultural beliefs, as well as a shortage of health workers in developing countries. Carolyn Miles says health workers with basic knowledge can help mothers start and continue to breastfeed. For VOA Learning English, I'm Carolyn Presutti. From VOA Learning English, this is the Health Report in Special English. Nigerian doctor Ucha Amazigo has received the Prince Mahidhan Award for outstanding efforts in public health. Dr. Amazigo recently traveled to Thailand to receive the award. She has been a leader in sub-Saharan Africa in the fight against the disease known as river blindness. The disease begins when people are bitten by the black flies that spread the infection. The disease is known as river blindness because the flies live near fast-moving rivers and streams. Tiny worms spread throughout the body. This incites the body's immune system to attempt to fight the invaders. But the body's intense response can destroy the eye nerves. The infection can cause not only blindness, it also causes a painful skin disease. The cause of river blindness was first identified in Guatemala almost 100 years ago. The disease continues to be a serious health problem in many African nations and in Yemen. Medical treatment lasting as long as 20 years is necessary to keep victims free from the parasite that causes the disease. Dr. Amazigo is a former director of the World Health Organization's African Program for onchocerciasis control. That is the medical name for river blindness. Dr. Amazigo organized local treatment programs in communities. Now, 117,000 communities under 19 African governments treat the disease locally. In 1987, the drug manufacturer Merck launched a program to provide a medicine called ivermectin to everyone affected by the disease. The company said it would provide the treatment for free as long as necessary through the community-directed program. For VOA Learning English, I'm Carolyn Prasuti.
From VOA Learning English, welcome to the Health Report in Special English. The Gavi Alliance is a partnership between public health officials and private industry. The group provides vaccines to developing countries. Recently, the Alliance announced plans for an immunization campaign to protect 180,000 girls from cervical cancer. It has chosen 8 countries to start administering the vaccine for human papillomavirus, or HPV. Most cervical cancers result from HPV. The virus is passed through sex. Seth Berkley is Chief Executive Officer of the Gavi Alliance. He says 1 woman dies every 2 minutes from cervical cancer. That is more women than die in childbirth. Dr. Berkley says an estimated 275,000 women die from this cancer each year, and 85% of the victims are in the developing world. He warns that without intervention, the estimate would reach 430,000 deaths a year by 2030. The HPV vaccine is given to girls between the ages of 9 and 13. It is only effective before someone is infected with the virus. If infection does take place, the virus may cause extremely small changes at the cellular level. A pap smear test or pap test can find those changes, but the test may not be available to women in developing countries. If the infection is not found, the cancer begins to grow and will spread. There are signs like bleeding, and after the cancer spreads, there is pain. The HPV vaccine will be administered as part of school programs in Laos and 7 African countries. The 7 are Ghana, Kenya, Madagascar, Malawi, Niger, Sierra Leone, and Tanzania. Dr. Berkeley notes that efforts must be made to reach girls who are not in school. For VOA Learning English, I'm Alex Villarreal.
From VOA Learning English, we bring you health news in special English. UNICEF says the recent conflict in the Central African Republic has affected 1.8 million people. The United Nations Children's Fund says children make up half of the 800,000 people in urgent need of humanitarian aid. Rebel groups rose up against President Francois Bozizé in December. The Salika rebel coalition signed a peace deal with the president in January. A UNICEF spokeswoman says some of the hardest hit towns remain under rebel control. She says major risks for children include sexual violence and being recruited into armed groups. UNICEF says 8% of young children in the Central African Republic suffer from moderate acute malnutrition. 2% suffer from severe cases of hunger, yet basic services are hard to find. The agency says that in areas affected by conflict, fewer than half of the children attend school. UNICEF says the rebels and pro-government militias are recruiting children as soldiers. The group says it aims to bring aid to more communities to help families displaced by the crisis in the Central African Republic. Globally, UNICEF is appealing for $1.4 billion this year to meet the urgent needs of tens of millions of children in 45 countries and regions. The children are threatened by conflict, natural disasters, and other emergencies. In 2 areas of increasing conflict, the situation is especially threatening for children. In Syria, about 2.5 million people need assistance, and UNICEF says more than half of them are children. And a UNICEF official says that in Mali, children in the north are displaced, out of school, and at risk of being drawn into armed groups. For VOA Learning English, I'm Laurel Bowman.
From VOA Learning English, welcome to Health in Special English. There is more evidence suggesting that being bilingual is good for your brain. A new study found that older adults who have spoken 2 languages since childhood showed better mental skills than those who speak just 1 language. Earlier studies showed that the ability to speak 2 languages, or bilingualism, seemed to favor the development of these heightened skills. The study appeared in the Journal of Neuroscience. Brian Gold was the lead author of the study. He is a neuroscientist at the University of Kentucky College of Medicine. Dr. Gold and his team asked people to sort colors and shapes in a series of simple exercises. They used brain imaging to compare how well 3 groups of people switched among these exercises. The groups were bilingual seniors, monolingual seniors, and younger adults. The imaging showed different patterns of activity in the frontal part of the brain, in an area used for processing those tasks. Dr. Gold says the results suggest that bilingual subjects use their brain more efficiently. Dr. Gold notes that knowing a second language made no difference for the young adults. They did better at the exercises than both groups of older people. But he says the older bilingual adults appear to have built up a surplus from a lifetime of increased mental activity. He says his research confirms an earlier study on bilingualism among patients with Alzheimer's disease. That study showed that bilingual speakers suffered more brain damage, but were able to think at the same level as patients with less damage. Dr. Gold says he believes the new study confirms that bilingualism can protect brain performance. For VOA Learning English, I'm Carolyn Presutti. From VOA Learning English, this is the Health Report in Special English. The flow of Congolese refugees into Western Uganda is raising concerns not only about food security, but also the risk of the Ebola virus. Eating primates is a Congolese custom, but monkeys, chimpanzees, and other animals can carry the deadly virus. Disease experts are calling attention to the danger. So are environmental groups. That is because chimpanzees are endangered. Lily Ajarova is the director of a chimpanzee refuge in Uganda. She says primates are not a traditional food in Uganda, but they are in Central and Western Africa. She said this is the biggest threat to their survival. Dr. Monday Buswowa is with the African Field Epidemiology Network. He says just handling the meat of infected primates can spread Ebola. Lily Ajarova says she and her team have not yet found chimpanzees being eaten in Uganda, but they have seen other primates being eaten. She points out that in traditional Ugandan culture, primates are protected as totem animals, or animals representing a group. But refugees from the West have brought their eating customs with them. Over the past year, tens of thousands of refugees have entered Uganda, fleeing war in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Daniel Molla of the United Nations World Food Program says most of these refugees live in organized settlements. But he says cuts in food aid have increased pressure on local communities as refugees buy food from the same markets as Ugandans. That means the meat of primates, like chimpanzees, could be consumed. Over the past year alone, Uganda has suffered from 3 deadly outbreaks of Ebola. The most recent outbreaks have happened in the West. For VOA Learning English, I'm Carolyn Presutti.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Health Report in Special English. A new study says people are living longer, but many are living longer in poor health. Researchers found that life expectancy has increased by about 5 years since 1990. On average, men worldwide can expect to live 67 years. Women can expect to live to age 73. The findings appear in a series of articles in The Lancet. Richard Horton is the medical journal's top editor. He says the Global Burden of Disease 2010 study presents good news overall. The research found that far fewer people died of measles, tetanus, respiratory problems, and diarrheal diseases in 2010 than in 1990. Deaths from infections, childbirth-related problems, and malnutrition fell about 17% to 13.2 million. Global efforts have focused on reducing HIV/AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria. AIDS deaths have dropped, but every year each of these diseases still kills more than 1 million people. Mike Cohen is the head of global health research at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. He says infectious diseases are now better controlled. He says people live longer, but that means conditions not caused by infection, like high blood pressure and diabetes, are more common. The study found that non-communicable diseases cause more than half of the global burden of disease in 2010. The two biggest killers are heart disease and stroke. They caused 1/4 of all deaths in 2010. The top causes of disability were physical conditions like arthritis, back problems, and mental and behavioral problems such as depression, anxiety, and substance abuse. For VOA Learning English, I'm Laurel Bowman.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Health Report in Special English. Winter and cold weather is a fact of life to many people in the northern part of the world. Freezing weather can mean frostbite and hypothermia unless a person is prepared. Here are some ways to stay warm, dry, and safe in cold weather. Frostbite is damage that happens when skin is exposed to extreme cold for too long. It mainly happens on the hands, feet, nose, and ears. People with minor cases of frostbite that affect only the skin may not suffer any permanent damage. But if deeper tissue is affected, a person is likely to feel pain every time the area gets cold. Damage to blood vessels is more dangerous. This kind of injury can lead to a gangrene infection. Sometimes the only way doctors can treat an injury like this is to remove frostbitten areas like fingers and toes. Hypothermia is a condition in which the body cannot produce as much heat as it loses. Signs of hypothermia include uncontrollable shaking, very slow breathing, and difficulty thinking clearly. If untreated, hypothermia can lead to death. To avoid cold-related injuries, here is a simple way to remember 4 basic steps to staying warm. Think of cold, C-O-L-D. The C stands for cover. Wear a hat and scarf to keep heat from escaping through the head, neck, and ears. And wear mittens, which are warmer than gloves. The O stands for overexertion. Avoid activities that will make you sweaty.
wet clothes and cold weather are a dangerous combination. L is for layers. Wearing loose, lightweight clothes, one layer on top of another, is better than wearing a single heavy layer of clothing. And D is for dry. In other words, stay as dry as possible. For VOA Learning English, I'm Alex Villarreal.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Health Report in Special English. Hypothermia is a real concern if you are outside in cold weather for a long time. It is a condition that develops when the body is losing more heat than it is able to produce. Hypothermia can be mild, moderate, or severe. Mild hypothermia is something that most people who live in cold climates have experienced. You feel so cold that your body starts to shake a little, but you cannot control the shaking. The treatment for mild hypothermia starts with getting out of the cold, drinking warm, non-alcoholic liquids, and eating something sugary can stop the shivering. Taking a warm bath or sitting by a fire can also warm the body. In severe cases, the body temperature drops below 35 degrees Celsius. People may lose the ability to think clearly. Their muscles become stiff. In such cases, rangers for the National Park Service advise to prevent additional heat loss first. They place extra covering around the chest, head, and neck of victims to keep them warm. It is important to work fast to get people out of the cold. It is equally important to move them slowly and gently. Sudden movement can force cold blood from the arms, legs, and hands deep into the warmer middle of the body. The sudden flow of cold blood can cause shock. The process of rewarming a person needs to be done slowly in a hospital if possible. An extremely low body temperature can cause the heart to beat so slowly that a pulse may be difficult to find. In other words, a person who is suffering from the effects of severe cold may seem dead, but they may still be alive. For VOA Learning English, I'm Carolyn Presutti.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Health Report in Special English. New research shows that overweight or even slightly obese people have a lower risk of early death than people considered to be normal weight. Researchers examined the results of 97 studies. Most of the studies were less than 10 years old. They included almost 3 million adults from around the world, including the United States, Canada, China, Taiwan, Brazil, India, and Mexico. The research was carried out at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in the United States. The study found that people who were considered overweight or slightly obese were 5 to 6% less likely to die from all causes than people of normal weight. But people with higher obesity ratings had almost a 30% greater risk of death compared to normal weight individuals. Catherine Flegel led the study. She says she was not surprised that there was no higher risk for overweight people, but she had not thought that the risk of death was definitely lower. The study has raised new questions about body mass index, or BMI. This is a measurement of body fat as a ratio of height to weight. BMI guidelines were used for the study. In recent years, many public health experts have promoted body mass index as a way to predict the risk of health problems. But a person's BMI can be misleading. Stephen Heimsfield is head of the Pennington Biomedical Research Center in Louisiana. He says people can be physically fit and in good health, but might weigh more because they are more muscular. Still, he cautions that the study's findings should not be an excuse for people to add a few more pounds. For VOA Learning English, I'm Laurel Bowman.
From VOA Learning English, we welcome you to news about health. Children with autism have difficulty with social skills and communication. They may seem different, have repetitive behaviors, and have abnormally intense interests. A widely used medical guide will now list autism under a new definition and name: autism spectrum disorder. The changes will appear in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders to be published in May. The spectrum represents a group of developmental brain disorders ranging from mild to severely disabling. A milder form, called Asperger's syndrome, will no longer be listed as a separate disorder with its own name. Autism is more common in boys than girls. What causes autism is not clear. Scientists are studying genes and possible environmental influences. Doctors usually cannot confirm a diagnosis of autism until a child is about 3 years old. Rebecca Landa is a researcher at the Kennedy Krieger Institute and Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine in Maryland. She wanted to find out what differences in development showed up earliest. She led a new study that observed 235 babies between 6 and 36 months of age. She says at 6 months, a baby may show risk signs for autism in the form of delays in communication or movement. By the time a baby is 1 year old, signs include difficulty in using words and not looking eye to eye or reaching out to other people. By 14 months, the baby might smile less and use language less. The earlier parents notice signs, she says, the sooner they can begin doing things to improve their development, like playing games and talking with their child. For VOA Learning English, I'm Alex Villarreal.